Okay, this is me and my mentor Colin, basically reviewing and debriefing on my video 2, which was supposed to cover standards 1, 2, and 3. So Colin, I think overall for learner development and for learning needs and differences and learning environments, I felt that this class was a solid performance. I would say one of my stronger points in the class was, again, differentiation, which I feel like I'm starting to get more adept at. This time, compared to my first video, I felt like giving student choice rather than making groups like homogenous based on like ability or ELL was a nice different tack to take. And I'm a big believer in like giving students agency, empowering students, and I think that was effective. I did see students react well to it. And it was also very varied. Like I noticed some students, so there's one visual, 2 text-based sources that they could use for that hippo phase. And it was pretty varied. I think basically a third. The third one, the source number 3 was a little more difficult, more substantive and abstract than the 2 text-based ones. But anyways, so again, I would highlight the hippo part of my lesson as a strength. Regrettably, if there was one thing I was a little disappointed in my lesson was I had to incorporate a little more lecture, which I called my lesson plan mini lecture. So we had a typhoon, and because of the typhoon, I lost a full double for that week. So I normally see him 5 times, I only saw him 3 times. And I basically had to call some audibles and improvise a lesson plan. And I really had to squeeze in content in a short amount of time. So that lecture phase, not the best way I want to do things. I think during that time, of course you lose some students. I remember seeing my kid Ray, he seemed like in the middle of the camera shot, kind of like head down a little bit sometimes. Not the best outcome, but again, the typhoon circumstances made it a little more challenging for that video. But under the circumstances, I still think it went okay. I guess that's like my general critique.
So yeah, as you said, that there were some difficulties that week, and that's part of becoming a good teacher is being able to find ways to get around that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like you mentioned that lectures you felt like were not the best way, and I would agree with that. But would there be a way that would maybe engage students a little bit more, do you think? Or is there an activity that you could do? Because I noticed that your hippo activity, where you did give students agency, that worked quite well with the class. It worked much better than your class last week that we watched.
That's good.
And I feel like with that kind of assignment, there were very few classroom management problems as well because the students were so engaged. Do you think that there's a better way that you could deliver this content rather than a lecture to make the students more interested?
Yeah, so obviously, lecture's not very student-centered. So that phase of the lecture was basically trying to get through the structure of government, especially with Weimar. So one thing I do in my history class, I haven't formally introduced it to my class yet, but a good idea there would be to prompt them with something called a group ID, where you basically give them 3 terms, and then they have to basically find a definition of the terms and link them together, right? So like making connections to common theme in history, something like that. Having them feedback responses somehow in a more interactive manner would have been good. Again, I think, I'm equipped to do that stuff. I think in my mind, because of the shortened week, like going down to 3 periods, I should have had like a full double extra to kind of get through the content and then have extra time to do skills. I guess I was just kind of feeling under the gun. So I just really wanted to focus on getting through that content because it is substantial.
Well, that's a good lesson though for the future. Anytime there are these difficulties that maybe take away a lesson, you definitely want to make sure that you get through the content, but not so much in a lecture-based format.
Right.
Now, of course, there is a time and a place for that, but you don't want to do too much, especially with the younger students that you do have. They tend to not react so favorably. However, what I would say is that watching your lesson, I did notice that for the most part, the classroom management was still quite good, even during the lecture phase. Whenever there were students that maybe weren't paying attention, I know sometimes you would call on them to get them to focus a little bit more. Sometimes there was a bit of moving around the classroom, which is something we talked about last time.
I remember that,
and that was better this week as well. So there were definitely some positives here. So definitely don't feel too negative about the whole lecture aspect of your class, because the majority of the class did go off without a hitch. It went quite well. But if we can take that lecture format, that time that you spent doing this lecture, and change it to something a little bit more substantive, it'll definitely help the overall class. Now, in terms of negatives, though, you did mention that you don't like doing lectures. In your class video, I noticed that you said some students were a little bit drowsy. So sometimes you would call on them, but there was a couple students, especially at the back, that did seem like they might not have paid attention as much as they could have. Is there anything else that you think you could have done maybe a little bit better, just to make sure that they are awake, they're engaged, they're in your lesson 100% of the time?
Yeah, and these are good points, because I think it links back to what we talked about last time, like, again, the capture rate, right? Like a class of 31 students, like capturing all of them, if not all, most of them. You're talking about like during the lecture phase, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, besides like basic classroom management techniques, I think it just comes down to, again, and you use the word substantive, like making something, like building in some sort of activity that, I don't know, utilizes routines of like feeding back responses. So like, the use of like, I don't know, like A4 size whiteboards, I guess, to respond to the teacher. Although that, again, does take up time, because they have to wait, and sometimes kids can sometimes intentionally stall when they do that. So like I said, the time factor was always in my mind. But yeah, something like that might work. And I've done that before. So yeah, again, I might have been guilty of being overly paranoid with the reduced schedule because of the typhoon.
So something I might suggest is an activity that gets them standing up. I know in history class, often they're at their desks, they're doing a lot of writing, a lot of reading, but something that gets them to move around the classroom is always great for this kind of thing. So we can discuss that more later. Maybe we can figure out some specific activities that you can use, but that might be something in the future that I would try.
Get them get the blood flowing.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. Especially after lunch. Your class was the period after.
This was the period after lunch.
Yeah. So students often, especially younger students, they do tend to be a little drowsy, a little sleepy, and that could help. So overall, though, I'm pretty happy with the lesson. I think you made some improvement from last week. There's still some more that we can work on, but that's okay. You still have time, and we'll continue this next time.
All right. Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you.